Greetings, everyone, and welcome. I am so excited, SEW, because we are the universe of bad puns. Lots of them will be coming your way today. I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Woolfork to New Jersey City University as part of the Lee Hagan Africana Studies Center's bold new programming for the 21st century. And it's good to be part of the reemergence of the center at NJCU at this particular time. I am Sonya Donaldson. I am the director of the Lee Hagan Africana Studies Center. I'm an associate professor in English and coordinator of the African and African American Studies program at New Jersey City University. So 92 hats, what I wear. We kicked off the semester with a really profound talk by Dr. Paula Marie Seniors on radical Black women activists and their significant roles in shaping contemporary life. And today we welcome Dr. Woolfork, who will be sewing together the themes of intellectual thought, craft, and activism in her talk, A Stitch in Time, The Art and Craft of Dismantling White Supremacy. I told you, I warned you guys. Professor Woolfork is an associate professor of English at the University of Virginia, where she specializes in African American literature and culture. She's the author of Embodying American Slavery in Contemporary Culture, amazing book. Dr. Woolfork has published extensively on televisual representations, including an article on blood mixing in the HBO series True Blood, and a chapter on All in the Family and the Jeffersons titled Looking for Lionel in the collection Racing for Ratings, African Americans in Television. In addition to courses on fictions of Black identity, Black women writers, and contemporary African American literature, Dr. Woolfork also teaches a popular course on George R.R. Martin's book and HBO series, Game of Thrones, a course which garnered national recognition. She recently published the article Nominal Blackness about the rhetorical and social weight of Black women's names, and an essay on the role of whiteness in the 2016 film, The Free State of Jones. In 2016, she was named part of the inaugural class of the University of Virginia's College Fellows, an ambitious 2-year program for faculty to revise the undergraduate curriculum by crafting a new approach to undergraduate education. As part of that initiative, Dr. Woolfork created 2 new courses for first-year students: Race, Racism, Colony and Nation, and Making the Invisible Visible. These courses address a variety of systemic inequities, including racism and white supremacy. In the summer of 2017, Dr. Woolfork became a founding member of Black Lives Matter Charlottesville. This group protested the white supremacist insurgency that had taken hold of the city. She was on the ground on August 11th and the 12th in a variety of capacities, including nonviolent direct action, working with the Bail Fund, sewing for a creative arts team, and participating in a media collective. Her essay, This Class of Persons, When UVA's White Supremacist Past Meets Its Future, was published in a collection of essays about the terror events in Charlottesville. Professor Woolfork is also the founder of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter, and the host producer of Stitch Please, a podcast that centers Black women, girls, and femmes in sewing links. And I had the distinct honor many years ago of being Dr. Woolfork's research assistant when I was a graduate student at the University of Virginia. So I'm incredibly honored that she has agreed to give a talk today. And so without any further sewing puns, please join me in welcoming Dr. Lisa Woolfork.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for Zooming. I'd like to thank Professor Donaldson. It is a great joy in the profession of teaching to see your students grow and become such marvelous teachers and scholars in their own right. So I just want to thank you, Sonya, for this invitation. I'd like to thank also the Student Government Association, the Black Alumni Administrators, Faculty, Students, and Staff Organization, and the Center for Leadership and Engagement for helping to make this talk possible. Thank you all, friends, families, colleagues, supporters, and new friends for being here and joining me today. What I have is largely, there are some slides, and I know sometimes people get a little tired of slides, but there's some foolishment that you are going to want to see for yourself. And so I thought, oh, it's my sister. Hi, Stephanie. Did you help your mama get on? Hi, Stephanie. Anyways, that's my sister. So anyway, so exciting. So I want to start with a PowerPoint, which is going to have quite a few slides, but then my hope is at the end, we could have a conversation. I'm hoping that this will transform into a dialogue. Hi, Shanice, Henrietta, welcome. Thank y'all so much for being here. So I'm going to share my screen. This has already been pre-arranged, so this should be all nicely set up and good to go. View as, I know, I do this all day, every day, what it feels like, but when it comes time to actually do it now, it's just like, oh, how does the internet work? Okay, so we're gonna do this as a slideshow and play from start. Okay, so again, thanking everybody for allowing me to be here today. I am delighted and honored. This is Black Women Stitch. This is our logo. I wanted to design something that looked and spoke to what the intention of this project and ultimately this organization would be. It's about Black women who sew and who believe that Black lives matter, period. It's quite a simple thing, but I wanted it to be instantly recognizable and instantly elevate the ideas of resistance that are part of Black Lives Matter. And so I have a short, like 1 minute video that shares the origin story of this organization. And so here it is. I don't know if you can hear this. I'm going to try to work on the volume some. It also is, there we go. So that is the origin story for the organization. And I wanted to also acknowledge that I am not alone in this. There are similar projects that are stitch-based and sewing-based that are working to intervene and center issues of social justice. These were the two groups that were helpful to me when I was first starting out to build Black Women Stitch. The one on the left is the Yarn Mission. This is led by Chiana, and she was an organizer in Ferguson, Missouri during the uprisings around Michael Brown's unjust murder. And she found herself going to a lot of organizing meetings and sitting and knitting during those conversations. And so she created this notion of the Yarn Mission, and the purpose of this group is that they do knitting for Black liberation. And anybody can join, anybody can participate. And the point of it is that when you're knitting, you're sitting in public spaces at times, and people might come over and ask you like, oh, what are you making? And you say, oh, I'm knitting for Black liberation. And then that helps to spark a conversation. Chiana Sewell is her last name. She's been fantastic. And I've been really grateful to her for her clear visioning. Similarly, on the right, we have the Social Justice Sewing Academy. This is an organization started by Sarah Trail, and she lives in California, and it's designed to elevate issues of injustice and to kind of promote equity and fairness. Now, you would not imagine that equity and fairness would be something that you needed to really argue about. But then you would not know very much about how white supremacy shows up in maker spaces. White supremacy in sewing and quilting is just like white supremacy everywhere else. You could have overt forms of it where you have Klansmen and Nazis marching through campus with fire, or you could have the type that is more quotidian, more daily, that wears on you, and it can be eroding and corrosive over time. These subtle forms that don't smack you in the face, but still leave you shaken. And both of these, in my opinion, are forms of violence. And so I wanted to start this conversation by giving you some examples of what white supremacy in the sewing community has looked like and the kind of interventions that Black Women Stitch and myself, as well as the Stitch Please podcast, have done to intervene. Now, you are looking right now at a quilt block. Quilts are made up of, you can imagine a quilt is, some people think about it as a collage. There's lots of ways to think about quilts, but the fundamental basis of a quilt is a block that is a lot of squares. Imagine like a checkerboard, and each square in the checkerboard is like a quilt block, and the checkerboard itself is the quilt. This block right here, this sample block, was called number 2 pencil power. It was the honor block for the National Quilting Museum. The National Quilting Museum is in Paducah, Kentucky, which is known as one of the elite premier venues for where quilters want to have their work showcased. It is a national organization. It is seen as the national headquarters and home of American quilting. And so to participate in this block of the month club, to be chosen and selected is an honor. And so they often call it an honor block. This block was designed by a 17-year-old in a Baltimore high school, and it was turned, this is the student did a piece of art, and then a quilter came through and transformed it into a paper piecing block. That's why when you look at it, you see all these straight lines. Now, this block caused a huge problem. And this was I think it's just essentially what we're looking at here is the word injustice. If you look at the first 2 letters, those are gray. The rest of the letters are black. It's meant to suggest that the person with the pencil has erased the letters IN from the word justice in order to secure justice, right? You erase injustice and you make it justice, right? Who on earth could debate a thing like that? Who wants more injustice, right? Who doesn't want more justice in the world? Well, a lot of white ladies on Facebook who sew apparently care not at all about justice. And one of the things that I actually spoke with this reporter, she contacted me and we had a deeper conversation about this because I was telling her that what is actually happening is a lot of gatekeeping. That the white women who were involved and really angry about this block, again, a pencil erasing the letters IN from the word injustice, a lot of those folks who were angry about it saw that Sarah's organization and this block itself, that they were interlopers. They were outside agitators. Everything was fine until these Blacks essentially came in. And again, this wasn't every person who was on that thread. There were some white allies who stepped up and said things, but a lot of the heavy lifting was done by Black women. And one of the things I'm fortunate is that I don't give a shit about these people. That's one thing. There are a lot of Black sewists and quilt teachers, and they have relationships with these organizations and companies that I respect that they don't want to jeopardize. I don't have those relationships. And if I see something that is racist and harmful, I will certainly say so. And that's one of the benefits, I think, of an organization like mine. So if you look, this is just an excerpt from the article, and I wanted to share it because I'm particularly proud of part of it. This is giving a summary about the National Quilt Museum's Block of the Month Club. It gives out quilting patterns from artists, and it's like there's 3,400 members in the group, and there was a lot of agitation about it. But I want to look at the last paragraph. There's never been a dust up like this within the 2-year-old international group, members said. Backlash over the block's perceived political undertones led to charges of intolerance. Then new versions of the design set off a second round of angry posts and a debate over whether the changes made their work ineligible for a highly coveted label that they can receive for assembling the 12 challenge blocks or honor blocks into a quilt. So the Block of the Month Club, way that it works is during the year, you make 12 blocks and you assemble those 12 blocks into a quilt, and you can look back at your year and say, oh, this is when I did all these different things following this program. I am specifically proud of the last line about whether the changes in their work made their work ineligible. This was something that I did. I am so proud of myself because I contacted the museum, and it was quite funny because I called because I was so angry. And I said, let me talk to Frank. That's the director of the National Quilt Museum. And they put him right on the phone because I was so hot. I was like, look, you have a problem here. You have a real problem, and you have an opportunity to fix it. Now, it's up to you whether you will or not. But I didn't believe that anybody who changed the block should be eligible for an award for doing it, right? So this is what we talked about on the Stitch Please podcast. This is the logo for the podcast. We did an episode of this. I think this might be episode 12, which was published actually in January of this year. This show is doing really well. I'm super proud of it. We just crossed into 100,000 downloads, and by the end of this month, we'll hit 110. That's a big deal because last year I was trying to get 10,000 downloads at the end of 2019, and now at the end of 2020, we're about to cross into 110 downloads. That's 100,000 downloads in the course of a year, and I'm super proud of that, especially since we don't have any sponsors, and I'm just doing all of this on my own with GarageBand. So let me give you a little word about paper piecing. Paper piecing is some of the easiest form of quilting that you could ever do. I like it a lot because essentially what you do is you sew on a piece of paper. There are all these straight lines. If you look at this piece that I did on the right, that's a paper pieced quilt where I have, you put your fabric right sides together, you flip the paper over, you sew on this line, and then you turn the quilt back, you turn the fabric back. It sounds really complicated, but essentially you're sewing on a dotted line on a piece of paper. That's how you make all the straight lines, and that's how you get really precise corners and things like that. So what I wanted to show you, again, this is the block. It's a pencil, the word injustice, and the letters IN erased, right? You follow the lines, you sew on the lines, you stitch and flip, stitch and flip, stitch and flip, easy. Except for when you object to the idea, when you reject it entirely, which is what we will see coming up next. So this is someone who, what you got instead was, instead of people saying, I object to this block because I don't want politics in my quilt, or I resent the message, which is what they, in my opinion, were actually doing, they decided to change it entirely. Instead of working on, this resembles nothing of that original block. So this person is saying, oh, I want to sew beauty. This is my interpretation. It fits my personality. It fits someone surrounded by farms and who loves to garden. Not completely done, but a pretty good start. Again, this has nothing to do with the block. if you're going to do the quilt, you need to do the block as it's assigned, in my opinion. There are rules for this thing. There are rules in the quilting community, especially around challenges. And some of them are so strict that if you use the wrong background fabric, or if you refuse to use the fabric or the design or the pattern or the materials, your quilt is seen as ineligible. It's seen as not correct. And it's not following the program. So people are familiar with, certain challenges having rules, except in this case, when they just did not want to follow them. Similarly, this is just hideous. I don't know what is happening here or why. I guess there's a pencil there. There's an eraser. I don't know what the Tinkerbell is. Are those scissors? I don't understand how this is meant to be the block for that January block. This is people doing their own interpretations, okay? Yuck. Oh, in my opinion. I'll let you form your own. Here's another one. This person's January block says, I found background fabric with women's sayings. My word is love. We all need it. There's something about this notion of offering women's sayings as a background, as if in my reading, to suggest what I'm doing here is actually feminist. It is actually, and it seems to me a kind of a perfect example of white feminism, right? I am not going to sew the block about erasing injustice, but I will replace it with words from white women and the word love, and here's a pencil, fine. It's pretty much the same thing. And then I'll put a gnome in there. Like, it's just a complete revision, but also one that they see as utterly legitimate. But of course, I disagree. Here's another one about hope. I have caught up. I wanted to write something rather than erase. So this person believes that what they are doing is adding value to the quilt block. That quilt block was trying to erase injustice. Look at me. I'm going to write hope. She's saying that for January, I wanted to write something rather than erase. Also, if I decide to donate my quilt to charity, I don't want it to be political, but rather hopeful. Now I feel more confident with foundation paper piecing. Again, rather than using the pattern that was provided, she designed an entirely different one, right? Because she did not want to commit to the task that was being assigned. Similarly, somebody loves Disney World, and they decided that rather than talk about injustice, they would turn the quilt block into one that was a tribute to Mickey Mouse. Here's my January block. I think it goes well with the others. One of the group members suggested that I do a paintbrush, so I ran with it. This looks nothing like the block that you were given. And to me, there's something, I love Disney World too. I actually do. We're a big Disney family, Disney Vacation Club members, all of that. Love it, love it, love it. But I would not switch a block that was about erasing injustice with this. It is a complete resistance to it. Similarly, somebody else wrote, here are all her blocks for her quilt. I'm all caught up. I'm keeping with my Asian theme. I thought a brush with peace would make a good addition. So you see all of this stuff about, I want to think about writing something and not erasing something. I want to think about being peaceful. I want to think about being loving. All of these are a comment and a rejection, an utter refusal to participate in something that a Black woman offered, and that, that is willing to try to propel and move conversations forward. Completely overlooked it deliberately. I also want to put a note here for you all to think about. You would not believe the fetishization of quote unquote Asian that happens in quilt communities in particular. Asian, quote unquote, Asian fabrics, Asian quilt styles, Asian this, Asian that. And these people, some of them are so freaking racist, but they love the Asian fabrics, or they'll have an Asian fabric club where it's a lot. It is just a lot. I wanted to put that there just to get you to think about how one can use Asian as a theme. It seems problematic in my mind. This one also, this person used the same pencil, but wrote a totally different word, which she says that this was in tribute to her husband's cancer treatment and how she wants his cancer to be erased. But injustice works because if you erase the letters IN from the word injustice, you end up with the word justice. If you erase the letters CA from the word cancer, you don't end up with another word. It's similarly, this person has do something completely different, designed her own pattern, created her own, just went completely different, and how happy she is in this, right? My January block is done. There's some embroidery, but the basics of this month's challenge are met, right? So the month's challenge was to make that block. There have not been other blocks where people so radically rejected the block itself. They might change a few colors, but they're not going to change the style and the design. This person has taken the block and said, well, the important part of the challenge is having a message and using paper piecing. That is not what the challenge is. The challenge is to make that block, because that block represents the Social Justice Sewing Academy, which had an exhibit at the museum. It wasn't just show us how to paper piece. This one was the one that I was so angry from this. This was just, what we're looking at here is like this Americana in the upper left corner, this kind of Americana flag. And then the message, you take the word injustice and you scramble the letters so that it reads just nice. Now, what you see in the middle there is a little B. It's a cute little B. So it's saying just be nice. I cannot adequately explain how enraged this made me. And I would love to, just get y'all to keep thinking about it as we move through the conversation about what's happening here. You have someone who would transform the word, who would switch injustice into just be nice. And I said, this is not a quilt block. This is gaslighting. This refusal to understand, this refusal to see, this refusal to engage. I won't give you justice. Instead, I want you to just be nice. And it just brings up all of these issues, of course, that we already are familiar with. This idea that Black folks need to somehow earn equity and justice, that somehow in the last 400 years of our history in this country is not sufficient. We need to constantly audition in order to be included and accepted. It just seemed like it also leads into this idea that a lot of white people have, that if you are nice, you cannot be racist, or the solution to racism is white people being nicer. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do instead with these systems that have been set up in place, not just political and social systems, but the systems that are installed in some people's imaginations. And what we are looking at with these quilt blocks is this imagination that lacks the capacity to experiment and to see anything beyond that. It lacks the capacity to see anything beyond its own reflection. And that's what these white quilters are doing. And that's what they do all the time. So this brings me to this lovely slide from the Charlie Brown Thanksgiving special. I think it aired in 1973. It started making the rounds again a few years ago. I think that they might have re-aired the special. But something that people notice is that Franklin is sitting by himself on this side of the table. I saw this really funny meme that someone did back in 2018, and they said, your Franklin Peppermint Patty has invited you to this dinner. You found out that it's not a real invite and that a dog is cooking the food and you have to sit by yourself on the table. This isn't a dinner, this is get out, is what they said. I thought that was very funny. But Franklin is sitting by himself on the side of the table. I've seen this being used in things like racism. Sometimes it's subtle, right? And of course, something I thought was very funny, Snopes did a post on this, and the question was, does this prove that Charles Schulz is racist? And Snopes said no. And I'm like, this is not about proving whether the illustrator is racist. You can clearly look at this and you have everybody sitting with somebody else. And then you have this child, this Black child. Apparently 4 people can sit on one side of the table, but only 1 can fit on that side. It's clearly problematic. And if you don't think that, then look at this. So he's in this rickety chair, and then the chair breaks. And so it's just kind of like, slight on top of slight on top of slight. And that is, I'm trying to make a connection here between these types of benevolent racisms, which are actually toxic and harmful, and things that might be seen as more overt. So for me, in creating Black Women Stitch, one of the things I wanted to do was to find a way to center the joy and happiness for Black women, girls, and femmes in sewing, to find a space, to create a space that was for us. And this is why I do not imagine this project as being part of any kind of diversity and inclusion initiatives, because I often find those initiatives start at the wrong place. I think any diversity and inclusion initiative needs to start at white supremacy and dismantling that, exposing it, dismantling it, taking it apart, as opposed to trying to integrate people into a system that's already flawed. And so for me, creating Black Women Stitch was a way to enjoy being Black and enjoy sewing and enjoy being with people that I really enjoy being with. And so this was a recent update to that photo. Franklin having his own party, right? So Franklin went from being the one kid who's on the side of the table who is, maybe happily tolerated and welcomed by the white people there, by his friends. He just happens to sit alone. He just happens to be given a chair that breaks. It's just coincidence. Who's to say this is racist or not? And again, it's not about intention. It is about impact. And the impact, I think, of many Black folks looking at that image from before, it's clear what's happening here is problematic. But my sister sent me this, and she says, "That's your story, Lisa. So glad you created your own Black ass sewing platform and retreat." And my other sister agreed, and I just wanted to thank them, and I still do. My brother-in-law actually, maybe 4 years ago, was like, "Why do you put up with the racism in all these craft groups? Make your own group." And I'm like, I just can't do it. I just don't have time. It's just so much work. And I really wish that I had started earlier, before the traumatic terror attacks that kind of propelled me to this path, because but I guess things happen in the time that they happen. But I really am, and this is what sewing looks and feels like for me now. Before, that was 20 years I spent in these kind of sewing clusters, with being the only Black person, and just tolerate. It was fine. People were fine. They were nice. They were nice enough. Sometimes people would say sideways things. Often people would say sideways things. But I was like, hey, this is much easier than me trying to do this on my own. It's fine, until it wasn't. And I'm really glad that I made that transition. So here's just a bit of what we've been doing in 2020 with Black Women Stitch. I do weekly Instagram live video chats every Thursday at 3 p.m. on the Black Women Stitch channel. We had our last in-person event in March of 2020, which was really great. It was like, that was my last time seeing anybody in person who was not my immediate family. Like these women that I spent a week with at the beach. And this is true for many of us, that seeing each other was one of the last times we had been in community with people since even now. I got grant funding from the Center for Craft to do an interactive program at the American Studies Association meeting, which is a big deal because the American Studies Association is really hard to get into. It's very competitive, but I wanted to do a panel on stitching truth to power, where we would stitch that quilt block. And it got accepted, but it got accepted, which was great. I got grant funding from the Charlottesville Area Community Foundation this year to help build infrastructure and to help us get started. I am definitely in founder mode because I'm like so excited and I love the project so much that I'm willing to work on it all the time. And I do work on it all the time. But that's not sustainable. And so I'm very glad to have not a super large amount, but it's better than poking the eye with a sharp stick, to start to build out some support around some of the things that I want to accomplish. We participated in the Smithsonian Institute's African American Craft Summit. We advised during the formation of a new initiative, Black Makers Matter, which Julian, who's on the call, is very involved with. We also created a Jiffy brand channel. So we have all these great, cute GIFs or GIFs that are super cute. And then I ended up hosting the Stitching Truth to Power workshop with Deborah Grayson, who was also on the call with Deborah Grayson, Badass Cross Stitch, and Sarah Trail, who founded the Social Justice Sewing Academy. We did the workshop on Zoom, which really was exciting and is helping me think about doing more public-facing events like that for Black Women Stitch in the coming year. I also want to add this. I applied for grants from Joann Fabrics, which was doing a Black makers thing to give grant money to people. The grant was actually a $5,000 store credit to Joann's, which at first I was like, store credit, well, that's raggedy. But then I was like, hey, I could eat, I could use that for something. I applied for that. I applied for some podcast programs as well. Spotify has an incubator, Google has an incubator, and there was also a small group called FemPower that was doing a program called Amplify Melanated Voices. I applied for all of those things and I did not get them. And I'm telling you this because even though I did not get those grants, I still believe that this project is valuable and the podcast has been enormously successful. And so just so you know, just because you might get rejected for something doesn't mean that your idea is bad. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it. Sometimes things just don't work out. I remember Tressie McMillan Cotton, who just got a MacArthur Genius Grant, said that she had been rejected for every fellowship she ever applied for. She applied for a Ford, she didn't get it. She applied for this, she didn't get it. She got so many no's. And now she's got a freaking Genius Grant. Like, that's a big deal. So don't let these kind of rejections, set you back too much, just because there's always, you just keep doing what you do and it'll shine through. So we did this workshop actually a month ago, actually 3 weeks ago, I think. And it was an embroidery and liberation workshop. It was sponsored by the Center for Craft. It was a free workshop with limited space, and we had a really good time. And in the upper right-hand corner, you see that is the embroidery design, the hand embroidery design for that quilt block, which was meant to be sewn as a paper piecing with sewing machine. This is something you can stitch by hand, and it's free, and you can get it on the Badass Cross Stitch website. So here's some ways to support if you'd like to support. I would hope that I'm going to ask Sonya to drop some links in the chat. You can donate to Black Women Stitch via PayPal. You can join the Black Women Stitch Patreon for as little as $2 a month. We are grateful to accept that kind of support. You can follow, if you don't want to spend money, you can follow Black Women Stitch on Instagram, and you can subscribe to the Stitch Please podcast. So this is one of our little GIFs. And it says, thank you so much. See, look, another sewing pun I couldn't resist. And that's all I have in terms of slides, but I'm hoping now we will have space for conversation. And thank you. Thank y'all. Hello. Oh, my mother's here. Hey, Mama. Hey, Sybil.
I saw your mom. I thought you might break and say hello to your mom. I saw when she came in. So
well, I couldn't see anybody. I was just looking at the slides. So
mom's here. This is wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa, for this talk. I wanted to start just by going back to the very beginning of that quilt, which is that you said it was created by a 17-year-old.
Yes.
And
yes.
So in thinking about the sort of controversy that erupted, was there any sort of consideration or conversation about the fact that this was a young person who was sort of attempting to communicate something about their lived experience, through this form? Was there that conversation?
They did not, because the whole organization of Social Justice Sewing Academy, what they do is that they work with children. They go into schools, elementary schools, middle schools, mostly, I think it's mostly middle schools and high schools. Yeah. And they go in and they work with these students and they help them and empower, they bring fabric, they bring materials, and they just let them explore and create. And there was little, at least in the chats that I was able to see in the group, no one seemed to give a shit. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was not about the block, the injustice block, as much as it was about the project as a whole. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is what they were rejecting. They were rejecting the idea that social justice was a suitable topic for quilting or their quilting. Mm-hmm. A lot of these women acted like quilting was their personal property, mm-hmm. and that it belonged to them and them alone. Mm-hmm. And if you wanted to do it, you have to do it in a way that makes us not feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so that's where that gatekeeping came in. It was this, it was almost like a textbook example of what white fragility looks like. Mm-hmm. Just folding out and why make it about race? It's not about race. I don't see color, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you know what? Lie to yourself, because you're not gonna lie to me. So for me, it was this question of belonging and of property. And it made me look back on my early years in getting involved with this medium. I went to graduate school in Wisconsin. It was 96% white. It was 4% non-white, not 4% Black, 4% non-white. I would be teaching students who would tell me to my actual face that I was the first Black person they ever spoke to. So like, it's this kind of this constant, and so, but that was my surround. So when I wanted to learn to quilt, I would go to a quilt shop and it was all white people. Mm-hmm. When I would go to an event or a quilt show, it was all white people. And even now folks say, like the Black women I know who quilt and who go to these different shows, like if we see each other at like a Mancuso quilt show or at the Sew and Back Expo, we speak to each other. We speak. I grabbed one sister and I was like, I have a podcast. Let me see your phone real quick. You got a phone? Because I need to put my podcast on your phone. So you don't have to be isolated, So this question of Blackness and belonging, and I just got tired. That's not a lie. That's not true. I did get tired. But I also realized that there was a line that I had crossed for them. And the line that I had crossed for them was joining Black Lives Matter and being active and doing protests and writing for CNN and Huffington Post and complaining about white supremacy. That was a bridge too far.
So
now, so go ahead.
I was going to say, so what did that shift look like in terms of your relationship to these spaces? And it's also really strange for me to hear about this kind of sort of proprietary sort of relationship to quilting, given that if we think about, African American culture and how central sort of quilting is. I mean, Alice Walker's, right, everyday use, and all the history that goes with that. It seems a really sort of strange thing to think of it as a contested form. But yeah, I know those are two separate questions.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of the community, I was hurt and I was embarrassed. So the big break came when I attended an event in September of 2017. Now, remember, in August of 2017 in Charlottesville, there was the huge white supremacist rally. Heather Heyer was murdered. Ben and I were there. We were like 100 feet from the crash site. We were having night terrors. Like, we woke up screaming for weeks. It was terrible. And when I think about it now, I really had no business going to that. I went to a quilt retreat. I thought going to this retreat would help me get away from Charlottesville. It would help me just focus and concentrate on some sewing. And that's not what happened. So when I went to the retreat, when I got there, people just asked about how I was. I should also point out that even though I had been on like writing for CNN and doing all this stuff, all these white women who knew me, I think maybe 2 people out of all of them texted me or called to see how I was. Now, this is a group of people who, if it's your birthday or if you have a death in the family, they send cards, they send phone calls. But the fact that some white supremacists tried to kill us, that doesn't merit a call, right? And so I really had no business going, but I went. And when I got there, people started asking me, oh my gosh, I heard about Charlottesville. Are you okay? What happened? Were you there? I was like, yeah, I was there. It was terrible. Oh, we raised money for you guys and we've been really praying and blah. And people just kept coming to me. I did not volunteer this information. I just wanted to sit. I know that I was working on some Lego themed quilt blocks. I was making an Incredible Hulk. I was making a Captain America. I was making something else out of Lego shaped. It was this really cute little quilt pattern thing. And that's what I wanted to work on. And people kept coming up to me. So apparently what happened was the person who organized that retreat had made a rule, not in my presence, I didn't hear this, made a rule that Charlottesville was not to be discussed. I didn't know this rule. And so I just kind of like was doing my regular thing. I was actually Kim has one of these and my husband has one. It's a shirt, it's a hoodie. And the hoodie, I designed this with my Cricut, my Silhouette Cameo machine and some vinyl and a heat press. And it's a sweatshirt. And on the front, it says Black Lives Matter. And on the back, it says, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor, right? That's a Desmond Tutu quote. And that was in the bottom part of the sweatshirt. But sweatshirts sometimes have hoods. So the hood is down. But when you pop the hood up, there's a line that says, even white people are tired of white people's shit, right? So Kim has one, Ben has one, and I was selling those a couple years ago. And so I was working on those at the retreat as well, because I had all this like nice time and space and it was great. And so 2 things happened. One, when I got back to work, I went back to teaching and one of the associate provosts calls me. And she says, Lisa, we got a call about the sweatshirts that I think you're selling. I really like them. I think they're really cute, good job. But we got some calls. And so basically somebody from that event called the University of Virginia thinking they could tell on me. This is clearly somebody who has no fucking idea how universities work, because I am not going to get in trouble for selling a sweatshirt that's telling the truth. And I'm not going to get that. That's just not something like, and I told some friends about it and they were pissed. They were actually pissed at the provost, the associate provost, for like not protecting me from obviously some crazy people, And so that was one thing. The second thing that happened was a few weeks later, I checked my mail. Ben got the mail in. And before I went to this retreat, I had already paid my deposit for the 2020 or the 2019 event. It was supposed to be an event, a retreat, a beach event with these people. And they sent my check back. No note, no, just, I guess I just opened the mailbox and my check was there. So it was clear that I was not welcome at the next event. So I was just confused. I was like, was it canceled? What happened? So I called one of the white women that I knew and I was like, did you get your check returned? And she was like, no. And I was like, well, I got mine returned. I don't understand. She was like, well, maybe it's because you broke that rule about not talking about Charlottesville, but I don't think she's racist. I don't think she's prejudiced. The lady that sent your check back, I don't think she's prejudiced. I just think, and I'm like, you know, and that was the last time I ever spoke to any of them. Wow. And that was 2 years ago. And no, 3 years ago. And I am so happy. I am so glad and so delighted that I was able to build something that I needed. Mm-hmm. And it turned out to be something that other people needed as well. So I know that's a long answer to your question.
It's a long answer. It's a great answer. So the other question I have, and this is my last question, and then I'll, let other people talk, but it's to ask you, maybe it's not so much a question, to kind of chart for us those moments that sort of led you to Black Lives Matter in terms of, the foundation of it and the connection that you see between your work as a scholar and teacher, activist, and artist, craftivist.
It's so funny though, because people say that I'm like an activist and I'm just like, really? Someone's like, you're an activist professor. I'm like, no, not really. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. They're like, but you co-founded a media collective and you created this organization and you write these things and you protest these. I'm like, but that's just what people do when things are wrong. Like, that doesn't seem like you need to have a special title for that. When things are wrong, you just you have to write them, right? Isn't this what, Ida B. Wells tells us, right? That the only way to right the wrongs is to shine the light of truth upon them. Like, when we shining the light of truth, it's not a light bulb, y'all. It's actual activity. It's work. It's asking questions. It's pressing on things, And so for me, I see it as being all connected. I started sewing, although my mother, who is a master sewer, and my grandmother, fantastic. I wanted nothing to do with it. I didn't want anything to do with it. I think my mother would say how surprised she was that I was sewing in the first place. And she likes to say that I'm better than her. Or she's like, but I don't think that's true. But I don't think that's true at all. No, that's not true. But for me, it was about these two things came up together, my academic life and my sewing life, that I was using the sewing as just a break from the burdens of graduate school. It can be really hard. And it can be isolating and it can just be so slow. Oh my gosh, it just takes forever. You write this thing and you agonize over it and you send it out and you wait for feedback and you have to change it some more. And it's just like, oh, it's just ever gonna finish. Or like when I was sewing, like Ben would go out to a party, like because he was in law school, and I would stay home and make a duvet cover. And it's like, hey, I made a duvet cover and we could use it. And we actually still have it. It was something about the kind of the tactile nature of this kind of work. And I do see some connections between, writing and scholarship and teaching and the notion of kind of threading, certain ideas through a path. And helping people to find that on their own, what their priorities are. I do see this as all kind of being tied together for me.
Great. So those are the questions that I have. For folks who would like to ask questions, you can either raise your hands or if you want to put questions in the chat, I'm happy to be your amanuensis and your facilitator in that way. As well. So are there questions so far? Because I also have 3,700 questions that I can ask. Because all of this, I am completely fascinated and in awe of all of this, and especially the way that you've managed to sort of bring together these things that you love, that you're passionate about, with the intellectual and the political project, right? So I'm just kind of in awe of this, and thinking about, you know, some of what you were talking about in terms of the quilting circles. I remember a similar conversations happening in knitting circles as well, right?
Ravelry.
Right. And so there's this really sort of strange thing, I think, that seems to happen, in that there's an understanding of art and craft as sort of apolitical spaces, right? The spaces that are kind of like devoid of any kind of politics. And you don't actually even need to be a political person to conjure that. You just need to be Black in the space to conjure, for politics to be conjured by your presence.
Yes, politics get conjured by our presence. And I see Linda Rose is saying here, and I agree, the personal is political. But I think what also happens to Black folks is that there's folks who want to think about our human rights, not as just fundamental human rights, but as political issues, right? So you get these like ridiculous statements, like someone said to me, not to me directly, it was someone was relaying to me, this was a white person saying that she was told, oh, you're white, why are you voting for Joe Biden? And it's just like, what? Like it makes no sense. And yet what happens is it's Blackness. This is what happens in the way that the country has been built up, not just around white supremacy, but also about deliberately diminishing and trying to quash other racial categories, you know? And so, yeah, that's the thing that I continue to hold on to, this notion that somehow being Black, just being a Black person, as you were saying, being a Black person anywhere somehow brings up politics, because apparently our rights are optional, and that they have to somehow be defined by a committee that decides when we are ready for them. This is the failure of an assimilationist model of justice and equity, right? That's the failure. It's a failure of that model, because the goal, if you think that the goal is to just put Black faces in high places, I don't see how that's changing any systemic inequities just by having Black people there. It's not really doing anything. And yet it looks like progress, right? But in order for progress to work, white folks have to be willing to lose something. And that thing they have to be willing to lose is the benefits that accrue from white supremacy, you know? So, I don't know.
It's asking you to lose an arm like in Kindred, right?
No, yeah, you don't have to lose an arm like in Kindred.
So the other thing, I see that a question from Adrian. So if money weren't an issue, what public facing event would you like to organize?
I am so excited you asked this question. Because when I think really big about Black Women Stitch, what I imagine is like opening a retreat center, a sewing retreat center that is staffed with that's stocked with all sorts of machines and fabric and project, and it's open year round. And Black women groups and Black women individuals can kind of come and have artist time, come and create, come and relax and take their shoes off, and know that there's going to be catering provided, and know that there's going to be people there that want to support and, you know, encourage their creativity. It would be like, that would be like if there was no, like if money wasn't a barrier. I remember driving out a few weeks ago to go to an outdoor farmer's market, and I was like, wow, this little space right here would be a beautiful place to put a retreat center, you know, like that would be amazing. So those are the big dreams if money is not an issue. That would be one of the things I would want, would be to have a building, to have a physical space that could happen all the time. And it would just be there and anybody could come. And it would be so well endowed that if people couldn't afford to come, if they didn't have a lot of money, they could still come. Like that's the thing that I would love. What is more likely, and something I've been talking with local folks here in town. This is Tabia Munt. She's a co-owner of this makerspace in town called The Hive. And she was on the podcast a few weeks ago. She's really great. She's a Howard grad. She was an architect, and now she is an amazing artist. And we are going to do a collaborative event for Charlottesville. I think it's going to be like a similar hand embroidery type thing, just because that is pretty restful to do. And I actually hate hand stitching. Like I just learned to do this like 3 weeks ago. And this is the thing about getting a PhD. You get a PhD, you think you're good at everything, and you're not. I'm not. But the hand stitching, I'm really starting to enjoy the hand stitching with the embroidery hoop. Hand stitching hems and stuff like that, no, not for me. But that is something I would really, that's one of the forward facing events that we are doing. We're also like, we don't have a website. We do not have a website. We do not have, this whole project was created on Instagram. I recruited people to come to the events from Instagram by like screening and talking with people and having a really strong intake form to make sure that people who were coming to our events were on the same actual vibe, right? So one of the questions I had in the form was, how do you racially identify? And someone was like, human. And I was like, well, you can't come. You're not you can't come. We're not going to be doing this nonsense. We're not going to be talking to you about this nonsense. Like, oh, I'm a person. People are, no, that's not what this is. So I would read, yeah, they can't sit with us. And so like, that is something that I would like to kind of continue to build on. So that is something we're looking for now. I am working with a couple of web designers now to have a website for Black Women Stitch moving forward. Because I hadn't been thinking, and maybe all of you all know this already, but like, all of the things that I'm creating, I think we have like 75 podcast episodes now. We've got like 10,000.
Archive. You have an archive.
We have an archive, right?
And it's actually quite amazing. I've been going through and listening to these podcasts, and what we have already is a sort of an archive of a particular history, right? Yeah. It's actually a really important archive in the making.
But it has nowhere to live.
Right.
Right. So right now the podcast lives with the podcast host. And I had not thought at all, Sonya, which is funny. I mean, it just maybe a month ago.
Alex Gill is actually on this Zoom right now. So you might want to wave hi to Alex and and we can talk about how to get that archive.
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh, Alex, it's so good to see you.
Nice to see you too, Lisa.
Oh my gosh. This is so heartwarming to look and see these familiar faces and new friends and my brother-in-law and mother-in-law. Y'all are just amazing. Thank you so much for coming to support. But the thing I realize is that this is like intellectual property that really has no place to live. And if I'm not like, and I was thinking like, I'm just learning about search engine optimization. Like, I didn't know what that was. And I'm like, wow, I now have transcripts for the episodes that could then be searchable and people can find things. Wouldn't that be good? Instead of just like shooting these episodes out into the ether. Like, right. Yeah. So I'm definitely doing that. I'm definitely, we're working on that. I have actually a really nice team, a web designer and a web content designer that I got through in winning the grant from CACF. I also got access to a program called Catch a Fire, which is an executive volunteer program where professionals volunteer to help nonprofits do things. Oh yeah, because now I'm a fiscally sponsored 501c3 organization. So I work with a fiscal sponsor here in Charlottesville, which is called Congregate Seville. They were amazing during the uprisings. They're still doing really good work, but they are fantastic. So they're my fiscal sponsor. So I'm able to do certain things, but we're also working on becoming our own independent 501c3 because that gives you more access to things. But it's just a lot to do. Honestly, I feel like I'm tired all the time. And, I still have like all these papers to grade after I get off this call.
Yeah.
So like, it's like, I want to build a nonprofit and I want to build a website and we're working on a little video for the the program and working on a one pager and I am not kidding you, I think 28 projects right now. through Catch a Fire that I am managing.
I would believe you. And so
I've met you, I know how you are.
I know. Yes, Lisa Woolfork, if I recall, when I was a grad student, when there was a talk, she would come with her knitting materials and sit and knit, and we would sort of look around and think, what is she doing? After the talk, would actually ask the most brilliant questions that were the result of carefully attuned listening. And it was sort of like watching this amazing thing, because it was like Zen, right? While knitting. And
yes, Linda's got her knitting.
Yeah, we would show up and kind of keep one eye on her and one eye on the guest speaker to see what was going to happen. So the final question for me, and hopefully folks will ask other questions as well, is something you raised, and I've actually heard it as a kind of thread in a few of the conversations that I've listened to on the podcast, and that is to think about the centering of like Black women's joy and happiness, and to think about what that means in terms of, and I'm going to go there, in terms of the political, like sort of like what are the politics of centering Black women in this particular mode?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's absolutely essential. And something that I participated in this summer was the Church of Black Feminist Thought. And I highly recommend that. It was founded by two women of color who are in graduate school at a school in California. I'm not going to remember the names. My apologies for that. But the Church of Black Feminist Thought was a really powerful program. And they would do these sessions, these convenings a couple times in the summer. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we studied was Alexis Pauline Gumbs and her work with Audre Lorde.
Yeah.
And Alexis says, and I love this, and she says, freedom is not a secret, it is a practice. Mm-hmm. Freedom is not a secret, it is a practice. And I wrote that down. And it makes me think a lot about, what does it mean to practice freedom? What does it mean to kind of go through the day and to ask yourself, and this is another mentor mentioned this to me, does this feel like liberation? Does what you are doing feel like liberation? Does this feel like something freeing for you? And if the answer is no,
right,
then you need to decide why you're doing it. And we can look to our ancestors, we can look to our mentors, we can look to Audre Lorde telling us that poetry is not a luxury. Mm-hmm. We can look at these folks and the work that we can look at our own mothers and grandmothers who lived in challenging and more difficult circumstances with fewer resources and far fewer rights than we have right now, and still thrive, and still have joy, and still create beauty, and still have things for everyday use. That is something that we have inherited. This is something that is our right. And so I often I derail any kind of conversation about, oh, this is political, it's political. It's like, I refuse to believe that Black identity alone is political. If Black identity is political, so is white identity, right? And it's only racism that makes things involving Black people political. And it's only racism that has taught us that whiteness is neutral. Whiteness is not neutral. And it's hard to accept that. I mean, I've started seeing it, I've always seen it everywhere, but if you look at something like a color chart, if you look at a color chart of pantyhose, for example, and they're trying to show a trajectory of colors, think about how often they start at the lightest point and move to dark. That is white centering. That is centering whiteness as the core thing, and then it's imagining Blackness and brownness as additive. It's bullshit. Deviations. It's bullshit, and people should say so more. I mean, I get so tired. Look, we have all these colors. We've started with white and gotten all the way to the other colors. what happens when you stop starting with white? This is one of the things I love about Bisa Butler, who is this fantastic quilt artist. She's got a great big exhibit right now in Chicago. And she was saying that she was also trained at Howard. And she was saying she took a class with some of the Cobra artists. And this is this really fantastic radical Black artist group from the 70s, I believe. And she was saying that when she learned to paint, instead of starting with a white canvas, they started with a Black one. They would paint the canvas Black and then start. Africobra, thank you, Deborah. Africobra. Yeah, so they started with the canvas at Black. And that, it changes everything. And I just feel like I would love more people. I should not be like a fabulous 50 years old and just figuring this out. I don't want that to be for anybody else. I want everyone else to be able to figure this out way earlier than I did, you know? And one of the emotions I often feel is like a little bit of regret for not following what Kevin said, my brother-in-law, Kevin Crumbs down there, not listening to him sooner, right? Because the happiness and stuff that I have now is something that I could have had when I was being tolerated before, you know? And that no one has to settle for that. You know, and of course, it all depends on where you are in your area and all that kind of stuff, you know, but for me, like, I just feel like I learned a lot, but I also wasted a lot of time. I wasted a lot of time that could have been better spent. And if there's anything that folks could learn from this is to make these choices that procure and promote your liberation, because you are the only person that's responsible for that. Nobody else is going to give it to you. That's not how liberation works. You have to claim it for yourself. And we claim it every day with the choices that we make.
Maybe I am in the church right now. Who knew? Are there other questions? I think we have time for two more, maybe two quick questions. Or we could just all stare lovingly at each other.
I have them the mug I made you for your birthday.
Adrian, did you have a question?
Ma, see the mug?
Oh, hi, Mom.
Hi, Adrian.
Hi, Adrian.
Oh, me?
Yes, Adrian Dent.
So I'm coming at it from as an artist, and I love, Lisa, how you brought us into the quilting world and the complexity of the conversation there. I'm wondering if quilting because it's kind of considered a craft and in some ways outside of the world of art, if there's even more rigidity around confronting discomfort and actually engaging in generative dialogue.
You know, I do wonder about that, Adrian. Thank you very much for that question. The distinction between art and craft, in some ways, for some folks, is very artificial because it's racialized, because it's so gendered, right? Like a woman can be a cook, but she can't be a chef, right? Like these kinds of things that this is so, yeah. So, and I agree with Deborah saying the art world is worse. I was interviewing a student who's right now at RISD at the Rhode Island School of Design. And she was saying that she's having critiques in class and she is bringing up a Black woman. She is bringing up these issues of race and Blackness and racism. And her professors at RISD and the other students in her peer group in a class, like, don't want to go there. And so I consider RISD to be a really powerful school for design and art and everything. And if at that source of kind of pedagogical processing, they can't even practice having the conversation, I don't know. And another thing just to add about the craft portion, a lot of my exposure was through, oh yes, read Nell Painter's Old in art school. And Nell Painter was the person that I knew who would knit all the time. This Nell Urban Painter is thebomb.com. She had this great book on whiteness, a fantastic book on Sojourner Truth. Like, she's incredible. And she's an amazing knitter. And she would be knitting at conferences. And people were like, who's this Black lady knitting at conferences? And then she would say something and people would be like, oh, what? Yeah, because she's like that good. But the thing I realized from the Facebook groups is that I don't understand. I don't know if it's just Facebook is where all the racists go to live. I don't understand, but every Facebook group about craft that I have ever been in on that platform, whether it's about sewing, about using the silhouette cameo, about using sublimation machines, about anything, something racist always pops off, inevitably. And I, of course, would be the person to say, this is harmful. Can we stop doing this? I write to the administrators. I try to explain, but then that's causing drama. That's what they say. We are no drama group. Whenever I see that, I'm like, this group is full of morons. I can tell already. We are a no drama group. No, you're not a no drama group. You're just a group that has a very high tolerance for racism. That's all. And it makes me wonder too, since so many of these folks, like, they can't buy their Confederate flags anymore. They can't buy, you know, these things that reflect their values. So they're making them. And that makes me, that's what, I was just trying to come up with some kind of theory about why there were just so many assholes in these groups. And I just thought maybe it was because they couldn't go buy, Walmart and Amazon and Etsy have stopped selling Confederate materials, and they're just sad and upset. And so they take, I don't know why they do that, but there's a lot of that. And the proliferation of that in craft, I think is attached to the declining popularity of these racist ideas. I'm not saying that they're going away. I'm just saying they're declining a little bit because people cannot buy Confederate materials on Amazon like you used to, or even eBay. A lot of places, I think after Charleston, stopped selling these things. And so they're just upset. So die mad, I guess. I don't know.
Is that also on a hoodie?
It could be. It could be. I put all types of stuff on a hoodie. Hoodies, greeting cards, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if there are no additional questions, I'm looking for hands. I want to thank you all for coming today. This has been a wonderful conversation. And thank you, Lisa, for just gracing us with your presence, first of all, but with sort of providing us with an additional sort of lens or to think about social justice and to think about the political in art and craft and the intellectual and social work that we do. I really appreciate seeing the way that you bring all of these things together. And the important thing too, that it centers Black women's perspective, or and women identified folks, centers that perspective, particularly now, right? So I really appreciate the opportunity to be in conversation with you, and thank you everyone for joining us. Look for additional events from NJCU's Lee Hagan Africana Studies Center. There's a lot coming up for next year. So again, thank you for coming.